Welcome everyone to Sabbath School for the British Columbia Camp Meeting 2022. I understand that it has become something of a tradition that Global Mission does a feature during camp meeting, during Sabbath School. And so it's my honor to be with you today, even though it's virtually. My name is Jeff Scoggins. I am the planning director for Global Mission at the General Conference. And I'm in charge of strategic planning for mission and for managing all of the Global Mission projects around the world. And I have with me today also Ronaldo Sequeira. He is actually from Brazil, and he is the director of the World Jewish Adventist Friendship Center. And after we say an opening prayer, I will ask him to describe what he does for Global Mission and let him introduce himself. But before we begin, let's bow our heads for prayer. Gracious Father in heaven, we are thankful for the privilege that you've given us to serve you. And as we spend a few minutes to look at mission in the Seventh-day Adventist Church and how we are trying to move forward your mission on this earth, I pray that you would guide our discussion and guide our thoughts, and that you would continue to lead and to guide in the mission of your church. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Ronaldo, you are new to Global Mission. You've been with us a few months. Has it even been a year yet? Maybe tell us a little bit, what is it that you do for the World Jewish Adventist Friendship Center? What is that? What is your job look like?
Okay, well, you see, I started this my relationship with the Jewish Adventist ministry started a few years ago, not that few, but quite a years ago, and by the end of the 90s, when I was a professor here in Brazil in the seminary, and they started a new. They want the union here in Brazil, in the area of São Paulo, want to start a new Jewish Adventist congregation in the city of São Paulo. And since they knew I have some relationship with this kind of the culture, the language, for the Hebrew, and also some kind of relationship for my family background, they asked me if I would go there. And I said every Sabbath I would leave to São Paulo. We live about 120 miles from the city of São Paulo. And we go there, stay the day, and started this Jewish Adventist congregation. And since it worked well, then other unions in Brazil asked me to help them. Rio de Janeiro, the southern part of Brazil, Curitiba, then other places of Brazil. And for the last 20 years, I have been involved in Jewish ministry in Brazil, involved with the World Jewish Adventist Friendship Center, as the responsible for this kind of ministry of global mission initiative in South America division. So I traveled to Argentina, to Chile, to Uruguay, and other places to help them out, you know. And then last year, I just received the invitation, the call from the GC to help out as the director of the World Jewish Adventist Friendship Center. We started this year from January, so have been there for 6 months.
Okay.
But it's
excellent.
It has been a blessing, and it's nice. In this kind of work, Jeff, we create relationship with the Jewish community, with leadership of the Jewish community, the rabbis, the leaders of the institutions, of the conferences. They have also kind of federation of Jewish institutions, you know, synagogues. We go out to meet them, to get to know them, you know, establish a close relationship as an Adventist, so that they may know who are the Seventh-day Adventists. And especially also we create kind of relationship with Jewish from people from any different kind of horizons, you know. They get to know the Adventists, they get to know us, they would like to know more about us. So we start this kind of friendship, relationship, dialogue. And sometimes people want to study with us, to get to know the Adventist message. So we, by God's grace, we want to be his vessels for this kind of relationship and witness.
Okay, so one of the things that I'm actually kind of jealous about is that you get to move to Israel. You're going to be able to get to live there. Now, you and I were just recently in Israel together doing some planning for future projects there. And for me, it was my first time. I had never been there before, and it was a wonderful experience. And so I could start talking about everything that I enjoyed, but I'm not going to do that. But I do want to ask you, what are some of your favorite places in Israel and why? What makes them your favorite places?
Well, you see, probably my favorite place is the best known is Jerusalem. It's
Okay.
so much history, biblical history there related to the patriarchs, to David. You see, it started with relationship with Abraham in the Bible text, with David, with in Jesus, of course. When we go around Jerusalem, everything you have relationship with Jesus. And this is because of that kind of, you went there. And if someone goes there as a Seventh-day Adventist, this is kind of interesting because it's a place, even if the person never been there before, but you get related because you read so much in the Bible.
Okay, for those who haven't been there then, describe a little bit of what Jerusalem looks like today.
Well, Jerusalem today is, you have this kind of historical part of Jerusalem, the old city of Jerusalem, with all this wall, this the synagogues, the temple, the mosques, there, and the Dome of the Rock. This is the picture we know, everyone knows about. But Jerusalem, besides this old part, the ancient part, has also a very modern city around. So it's very interesting because you have a lot of history going back 3,000, 4,000 years ago, and they have very modern buildings and this mixture. And you have people from everywhere. When you go to Jerusalem, you meet people coming from everywhere in the world.
One of my favorite things was how the city is packed. There's cars and everything, but Sabbath morning, it's silent. Nothing happening. Fantastic.
That's kind of, this was my experience also because, we experienced something like that, those who lived in a Seventh-day Adventist institution, like, you go to a school, they can come Sabbath, everything is peaceful, from a little bit before the sunset and Friday, how long the Sabbath, it looks like we feel very at home because it looks like,
So outside of Jerusalem, what's another place that you
other
really
place
enjoy?
I love in Israel, I find very beautiful the city of Haifa with the Carmel Mountain. Is very nice in the.
That one's not in the Bible. Oh, okay. We know it as Carmel, right?
Carmel, because of Elijah, but the city itself with the gardens we have there, nearby the sea is very beautiful. But also you have all this area around the lake of Galilee, the Galilee Lake, the Sea of Galilee, which is very impressive. Also with all the story of Jesus around, you go to Capernaum.
And you know what was really heartbreaking to me is we have no churches, Adventist churches in Galilee at all. Not one. Yeah. So you've got a lot of work over there.
Of course, we do.
Okay. When you get to Israel, what you hope to be doing while you're there?
Well, we see. What I hope to do is, first of all, to have the possibility to meet a lot of Jewish Israeli people, to establish relationship, friendship with them. There's kind of the task we have, as the mission we have, is first of all establish a friendship relationship that builds up confidence, that builds up a relationship that one can ask you a question and feel comfortable when you receive your answers. This is my first we'll say the first challenge or the first thing I want to do. I have a lot of friends that live in Israel right now. That means that when I come back, when I go there, I have already a kind of a number of friends that I know already from previous time, But I want to enlarge this group of friends and really to have the possibility to have a meaningful interrelationship with them,
Okay.
And Israelis are very curious when they get to know you, and this is something every Seventh-day Adventist should know. We because you want to, in our community we live in a Christian world, so in order to establish a relationship, usually we say, "Well, I'm a Christian," and we are Christians. Our faith is a Christian faith. But when you say this to a Jewish people, a Jewish person, even in the United States, for example, Canada, the Jewish person think that you are Catholic.
Oh, okay.
When you say I'm a Christian, almost is a reflection. This is automatic. Yeah. They say you are Catholic if you are Christian.
Yeah.
They do not have much knowledge of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So when you meet people like this, you say, "Well, I'm a Seventh-day Adventist," and then they ask you, "What is this? What do you believe?"
Yeah.
Then you have a possibility to give your witness, and they'll be surprised. They say, "Well, a Christian that keeps Sabbath, a Christian that kind of points of view. I never imagined a Christian like that." Some of them, after they get to know you, say, "Wow, you are more Jewish than me." Because you are faithful, like your Sabbath or things like that. But this is a very good opening, So what I want to do is that in my kind of relationship, being it with individuals, being it a kind of more formal one, representing the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Israel also, with the leadership that's there, with our World Jewish Friendship Center. The name already established. We established a friendship, even an institutional level, that they get to know better the Seventh-day Adventist. And usually people are surprised. And this opens
we have just a few more minutes here. So I want to ask you, what are some of the challenges that we face working in Israel and that part of the world that make it more difficult maybe than even that it ought to be to work in Israel?
Well, many of the challenges is, for example, I remember when I lived in Israel, I lived in the kibbutz, and when we just arrived, me and my wife in the kibbutz to spend a year there, the person said, "Well, you are Christians, Seventh-day Adventists. They don't have just a Christian here, evangelical one, that gave us so much trouble."
So others that come before, I can see that.
The Jewish people, their relationship with the Christianity has not been a positive one. That's the major challenge. Christianity most of the time represents persecution, intolerance, bigotry, things like that, And then we need to break through and say, no, Christians, real Christians are those who follow Jesus. And Jesus is not persecution, bigotry, intolerance. We need to show the love of God. And we need to see the real love of God in Jesus through us. And when they perceive that real Christians not what they used to know, then they are surprised. And then the doors open and the Spirit can work, the Spirit can work. That's the challenge I see, because history of Christianity is not a good one.
That's wonderful. Okay, last question here for the last minute or so. What for those that will be watching this, what would you say are some of the top one or two most important things that Seventh-day Adventists should understand about Jewish life and Jewish beliefs?
Well, probably the first thing that Seventh-day Adventists should understand about Jewish life is that for the Jewish people, because of this past history, it's not easy for them to be Jewish.
Oh, okay.
So,
Okay.
they will not come out to you to say, I'm Jewish, I want to do. No, they are usually afraid, reticent to show themselves.
I see.
Until they get to know really that you are a real friend. When they go that you are someone who are open, who are friendly, who has this kind of loving attitude towards others, and respect. Because many times they are engaged in a kind of, when they show they are Jewish, the people say, well, why don't you accept Jesus? Why did you kill Jesus? This is kind of questions they receive all the time.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
So be loving, be friendly, listen.
Listen.
Give your witness with kind heart, with this kind of attitude that we see in Jesus in the Bible, he would relate himself to everybody, to Nicodemus, the Pharisee, to the woman of Samaria, people different, for the poor, the rich, the outcast. Why should we have this kind of attitude, open attitude, in order to receive people, relate to them, and give this witness of love of God to all life? This will be the first one. People Jewish is very suspect. You attack them. So say, don't attack them. And then say, and be real. We love people. When people see that we love people, they feel loved, and then they open themselves. Jewish usually they don't experience this. When they experience this from someone outside their fold, they really appreciate. Jeff can be my friend. Reynaldo can be my friend. And then in this open friendship, you see that God can work mightily, And this is probably people would ask me, well, no, this probably with the Jewish friends will be two things that you should keep in mind.
Yeah. Thank you, Ronaldo. It's been very interesting. I wish we had plenty of more time, but we don't. We have to wrap it up. But we wish you the best in your new endeavors coming up here, and hope we are able to come and visit you again there. Before we go into our lesson, before we go into our lesson study, please allow me to extend a huge thank you to all of you who support global mission projects around the world. I like to describe global mission kind of like the Marine Corps of the church. Global mission's job is to be the first into a new people group or place to help establish the church where there's currently few or no Seventh-day Adventists. And there are many places in the world still like that. And once we establish a bit of a presence in a place, then regular church structure is able to be established. Global mission then goes on to the next place where there's nothing at all to start again. So we have a very unique, very focused objective to touch the hearts and minds of the people around the world. And so thank you for all of you that help to do that. The only reason we're able to do this work is because of faithful, generous people like you who provide the funds necessary to be able to send workers out into the harvest field. If you want to be a part of it, you can give at global-mission.org/giving, global-mission.org/giving, and you can give to Global Mission there. And every cent of the funds that you donate are sent to support Global Mission pioneers working on the ground in difficult places and among people groups. So thank you again for joining us. Let's pray one more time, and then we will switch gears and move into the lesson study. Father in heaven, once again, we ask for your blessing on Ronaldo and his work. We ask for your blessing upon the Jewish people and all of the things that are happening over there. We know that your heart yearns to touch everyone in this world, Christian, Jewish, whoever it may be, that you long to have them in your kingdom. So we ask for your special outpouring of your Spirit to guide us all into a closer relationship with you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Our lesson for this quarter has us exploring the idea of life in a crucible. A crucible In case you don't know, Crucible is a container that can withstand extremely high temperatures required to liquefy tough metals like steel. And considering how hot steel has to get to be able to melt into a liquid, the container that holds it must be incredibly tough to withstand those kinds of temperatures. Therefore, a crucible is an excellent parallel for describing the Christian life lived in the midst of superheated evil. I also like to describe it as being enrolled in the Crisis Learning Center, and you'll see why I call it that as we go on. This week's lesson explored the experience of several people in the Bible who were enrolled in the Crisis Learning Center against their plans, against their will, whatever it might be. One of them was Abraham. Abraham and Sarah wanted a child so badly, which is a crucible in and of itself, of its own sort. They didn't just want children to love because for the sake of it, which they did, of course, but in those days, not to have children carried along with it a serious stigma and even potentially dangerous consequences, or not dangerous, I should say serious consequences. Without retirement plans, Medicare, assisted living options, and so on, parents relied on their children to care for them in their old age. At the end of life, and frankly, even in midlife, was cruel to those without children because society considered childlessness to be a curse from God. Abraham and Sarah waited for decades, literally decades, for God's promise to be fulfilled. So when Isaac was finally born, his parents fell deeply in love with him. Too deeply, perhaps, maybe. And that is when God decided to enroll Abraham in the Crisis Learning Center, a crucible. He did this by coming to Abraham with the outrageous command to kill his child of promise. The son that he loved so much, the son that God had given him. God told him to slay his son as a human sacrifice. I try to imagine Abraham's reaction to God's command, and I just can't. I just can't. And incredibly, Abraham obeyed. How could he do it? How could he obey a command like that? I imagine Abraham having an experience something kind of like Jesus had in Gethsemane, where he struggled to go through with what he knew he had been commanded to do. And with tears and cries and pleas, I imagine him begging God to please find another way. But in the end, like Jesus, Abraham surrendered himself to the will of God. He placed God on the throne of his life, and he determined to do whatever God commanded him to do. Why did he do it? Because Abraham knew God. Abraham knew God. And because Abraham knew God, he knew God would never command something except out of the most profound love and desire for the good of his children. In the most difficult circumstances imaginable to the human mind, Abraham placed his faith in the only one that he knew he could trust, the only one trustworthy enough for that trust. But even this was his son that he was talking about, his only son, the baby that he had cared for, the little forehead that he had sponged with cool water all night long when fever racked his body, the boy that he had played ball with, the boy who snuggled up with him for story time, the boy who was his life. So with tears pouring out of his eyes like a waterfall, and hands trembling so violently that he could barely hold the knife, Abraham chose to trust God and go through with it. You won't convince me that tears weren't also streaming down God's face. Even though he knew that in the end he wouldn't let Abraham go through with it, it still hurt God deeply to see what Abraham was going through in the meantime. But God had a reason. He had a good reason, as he always does. God would not have enrolled Abraham in the Crisis Learning Center needlessly. God needed Abraham to learn something critically important. And he needed this story to be told so that you and I can learn something critically important also. This story has so many parallels with the sacrifice of God's Son that it's obvious that what God needed Abraham and us to understand was that this was the plan of redemption for the entire world. This was how God would save countless lives. This was the story that would reverberate throughout the ages to show us the heart of God and the lengths that He is going to save us from the wages of sin. God was impressing upon Abraham His plan for redeeming the human race. God was to give His Son, His only Son, more precious to Him than even Isaac was to Abraham, to die as a sacrifice for us. And nobody was going to be there to stop God from going through with it. For God so loved the world, you know this one, that He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in Him, the way that Abraham did, shall not perish, but will have everlasting life. God pushed Abraham into a boiling crucible. He enrolled him in the Crisis Learning Center. And someday in heaven, Abraham will be surrounded by people telling him that his story is the reason that they are there. At that time, do you think Abraham is going to be angry at God for subjecting him to that suffering? One of the critical reasons that God allows us to suffer in times of crisis is to teach us lessons that are critical to our eternal life. Then there is the Apostle Paul, who spent a lot of time in the Crisis Learning Center. He was imprisoned, beaten, stoned, starved, frozen. He had been through so much for the sake of his Lord. Paul was well acquainted with the lessons of the Crisis Learning Center, and he had learned them well. And in one of the last stories of his life, God enrolled Paul yet again into another crisis. As he was being taken to Rome to stand trial before Caesar, their ship was caught in a storm blowing across the ocean or the sea for 2 solid weeks. The sailors worked full time, emptying the water that came over the sides through leaks in the hull. And to lighten the ship, they threw the cargo overboard. And their cargo, you know, was the reason that they were sailing in the first place. That was their business. They traded. But in the Crisis Learning Center, it's the luxuries that once seemed so important that are the first to go. Priorities have a way of becoming crystal clear in the Crisis Learning Center. What we thought we couldn't do without, it turns out we can do without just fine. And in fact, we can do without even more. And that's why the sailors, in desperation, threw even the ship's tackle overboard. Now, the ship's tackle is what they needed to sail. But right now, the only thing that was important was staying afloat. Even that drastic measure was insufficient, though. The ship was still in imminent danger of being torn apart. And driven by fear, they worked so hard to stay afloat that they never even took time to eat. And I suppose very little sleep even, if any. They were running on adrenaline, pure and simple. And after 2 solid weeks of suspense and work, even adrenaline was running low. And they began to give up hope. Now, by the way, hopelessness is actually a good condition to be in the Crisis Learning Center, because when we have finally lost all hope in ourselves and other people, that is when God can really begin to work on instilling a new kind of hope. Hope in Him, the only one who is able to save us. What a gift. What a gift to the sailors to have Paul with them in this crisis. He had spent enough time in crises of his own that he had become a tutor of sorts when others were enrolled in the Crisis Learning Center. I remember when my wife and I lived in Moscow. We were about 4 miles from a theater called the Nordost Theater, and it was during a play back in October 23, 2002. Maybe you'll remember this from the news back then, when suddenly 40 terrorists, armed to the teeth with explosives, took control of that theater with about 850 people inside. Of course, government forces quickly surrounded the theater, the building, but the terrorists were by then entrenched. The soldiers outside could not storm the building because the minute they did, the terrorists would blow up the building. They had wired the entire building with explosives. Any attempt at rescue, and everyone would be killed. This was a crisis, obviously, for those inside of the theater, including families, young children, but it was also a crisis for everyone who lived outside nearby like us. Those days of tension at the theater in Moscow and all around Moscow could be felt absolutely everywhere in the city. People were afraid, even though we weren't in the theater ourselves. I felt it too. My own stomach, I remember it vividly, was just knotted the entire time. Imagine, during that crisis, wouldn't it have been a gift to have Paul among them, saying, "I've prayed, and the angel of God stood beside me that night and told me that our lives would be spared"? Wouldn't that have been a gift? Wouldn't it have been a gift to have anyone, any Christian among them, with an intimate connection with God? During that crisis in Moscow, I noticed that my priorities became clearer, just as the priorities on Paul's ship became clearer. I threw overboard unimportant activities. I threw overboard careless talk. Life was serious. I spent more time in my Bible. I spent more time in prayer. I spent more time minute by minute looking to God. I grew spiritually during those days in the Crisis Learning Center, and I wasn't even one in the theater. When the crisis was finally over, we all felt relief, of course. I felt relief. Finally, life could go back to normal. There was no more need for crisis spirituality. I was free again, frankly, to drift away from God. Go back to normal life. Normal life, my friends, is unhealthy for spiritual life because we quickly forget how much we need God. We quickly forget the seriousness of the situation in which we exist every day. We begin to think again that the cargo of life is important. In a way, we need to thank God when we are enrolled in the Crisis Learning Center. God does not enjoy watching His children in crisis, but He is not beyond putting us into the Crisis Learning Center for our own good and for the good of others. God is a Father who loves us so much that He is willing, if it's necessary, to enroll us ever deeper into the Crisis Learning Center in order to teach us what we must learn. But even when we don't need a crisis for ourselves, it might be that God still calls us to the Crisis Learning Center, not for our sake so much as to serve as a guide to others who are in a crisis like Paul was. So there's Paul, Abraham and Paul, and then there's Job. Job lived a long time ago. He's the classic crucible example. The Bible tells us that he was not only fabulously wealthy, but he was also blessed with many children, and he was highly respected, and he was also blameless. Blameless. Job cared so much about his family being right with God that whenever his children held a feast, Job the next morning would make sacrifices to God on their behalf, just in case his children may have sinned. Not only did his family, friends, and the people around him love and respect Job, but God was also impressed with Job. In fact, he respected Job so much that one day, when all of the angels came together in a meeting with God, and Satan showed up at the meeting as well, God seemed to be bragging a little bit on Job. If you don't have your Bibles open, you might can turn them to Job chapter 1 in verse 8. You know this well. The Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." And you remember how Satan responded with a sneer, right? Verse 9. "Does Job fear God for nothing?" Satan replied. "Have you not put a hedge around him? He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." I'm sorry, I got backwards on verse 8. Let me start again here. Does Job fear God for nothing? Satan replied. "Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land. But now stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face." And how does God respond? How does he reply? He says, "Very well then. Everything Job has is in your hands." Now remember, God respects Job. God loved Job. He considered Job to be blameless. Considering that, why would God give everything of Job's into Satan's hands? Job was as good of a person as you could find on the earth at the time, and God just sicked the dogs on him. Why? Go ahead, Satan, do whatever you want with Job's family and his property. And Satan proceeds to invent the most cruel scenario you care to imagine. He strikes Job's wealth, his servants, and his family in perfect timing, so that one servant after another runs up to Job with the terrible news, and bang, bam, bam, Job gets hit with one disaster after another, culminating with his children. It's worth reading. Let's read it, beginning in verse 13. "One day, when Job's sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, a messenger came to Job and said, 'The oxen were plowing and the donkeys were grazing nearby, and the Sabaeans attacked and made off with them. They put the servants to the sword, and I'm the only one who has escaped to tell you.' While he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, 'The fire of God fell from the heavens and burned up the sheep and the servants, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you.' And while he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, 'The Chaldeans formed 3 raiding parties and swept down on your camels and made off with them. They put the servants to the sword, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you.' And while he was still speaking, yet another messenger came and said, 'Your sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, when suddenly a mighty wind swept in from the desert and struck the 4 corners of the house. It collapsed on them, and they are all dead, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you.'" God and the angels met sometime later, and Satan shows up again. And God, with some pride in his voice, I imagine, says the same thing to Satan. "Have you considered my servant Job?" And Job sneers, "Skin for skin. A man will give all he has for his own life." And so God allowed Satan to strike Job himself with painful sores or boils from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet. Anybody who has even had one boil will tell you that it's about the most painful thing you can imagine. There was no position in which Job could stand, sit, or lie down that wasn't excruciating. And God, who loved, respected, and considered Job to be blameless, allowed it all to happen. Worse yet, he's the one who brought Job up in the first place. Satan hadn't mentioned Job. So what does God have to gain from all of this? I remember visiting an ancient castle in Jordan when I was a kid. The walls were wide enough for a dozen soldiers to march side by side along the wall, and a guide told us that the king of that castle was so proud of the discipline of his army that to show off to his friends, he had his soldiers march along the wall to the end of the wall where they would fall off, and he let 100 of them march over the edge to their deaths before he finally called a halt, for no other reason than to show off his power. Was God doing something like that to Job? Was he making sport of Job just to see how loyal he really was? What possible redeeming factors could be at play in this terrible crucible? Let me ask another question to put it into some perspective. Looking at it from a different angle, do you think that when Job gets to heaven and asks God to explain what happened, that he's going to be disgusted and angered by God's answer? I highly doubt it, which must mean something. That must mean that God has a good reason for allowing his servant to be attacked by Satan. And there is. You see, there is a universe of God's created beings who are watching with intense interest this great controversy between God and Satan. There's more going on in the universe than just us, God, and Satan. And when you put this story in the broader context of a universe of onlookers, possibilities suddenly become clear of why God allows some things that he allows. Satan has put God on trial, so to speak, before a universe of created beings, and God is making his case and disproving Satan's case. Satan says that God is cruel. God asserts that he in fact is love. Satan accuses God of creating prisoners. God claims that he gives everyone complete freedom. So God in every possible way must prove Satan wrong. God never allows gratuitous suffering just for the sake of it. God has no stomach for the pain of those he created and those he loves. The only thing that will cause God to allow his children to suffer for reasons outside of their own control is if it helps to save someone's life. The eternal life of those God loves is more important than our temporary comfort. And this makes sense. I mean, think about it. If your daughter was about to step in front of a speeding bus and all you can grab is her hair and jerk her back in time, you're going to do it, aren't you? And the child who doesn't see the bus screams and yells in pain, "Dad, why did you pull my hair? Do you enjoy hurting me?" You know that if you could have done something else, you would have. But the most important thing was to save her life. And when she understands that, hopefully, she will be grateful that you were willing to hurt her in order to save her life. From what we know of Job's story, Job didn't need to have any lessons of obedience taught to him. But someday, Job is going to be surrounded by people thanking him for shining through in his suffering because their lives were saved because of Job's experience. With God, all suffering has eternal benefit. But we don't only suffer for our own benefit. We might be called upon to suffer for someone else's benefit, and we may not know why until heaven. Thankfully, God promises that he works all things together for good for those who are called according to his purposes. Job died not knowing the background of his story. But despite not knowing what was going on, Job maintained his integrity. Job 122 says that Job did not charge God. Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. To say that God is responsible for doing something wrong, according to this verse, is a sin. In fact, Job reacted in quite the opposite way back in verse 20 when the report came in that all of his children had just been killed. What did Job do? It says here that Job got up, tore his robe, shaved his head, and then he fell to the ground. What does it say? In worship. Bad news after bad news, including the death of all of your children. And he falls to the ground in worship. Amazing. Could you do that? I honestly don't know if I could. But there's a little bit more to the story, and it's worth exploring. Job had 3 friends who heard about his troubles, and they came to comfort him. And when they arrived at his home, they found him in such bad shape that they could barely recognize him. They saw that he was in so much pain that they were at a loss for words. They didn't speak, but finally Job spoke. And his words were not happy, joyful words. There are some who think that when the Bible says to rejoice in suffering, that it means that we should be happy about our suffering, which Job was not. But that does not really make sense. It's not some kind of righteousness to enjoy suffering. In fact, something's wrong with you if you enjoy suffering. Suffering is a cause for sadness. Jesus himself did not enjoy suffering. The picture that we see in the Bible is not of people rejoicing about their suffering, but of people rejoicing in the middle of or in spite of their suffering, counting it a privilege to suffer for Christ. Job did not enjoy his suffering, but he was careful that he did not sin by blaming God for it. His first words to his friends, he cursed the day that he was born, and he gave vent to his feelings of pain and discouragement. Apparently, Job's friends had come to him with a preconception of Job's situation, a preconception that was even prevalent in Jesus' time. And that was the idea that suffering comes from God as a punishment for sin in our lives. This faulty theology claims that the amount you suffer is directly proportional to the amount you sin. The prevailing belief of the time was that God protects the righteous and punishes the wicked with diseases and other unfortunate circumstances. Now, I would agree that God does not always protect us from the consequences of our choices. So if I smoke, I can't depend on God to protect me from lung cancer. But that's a different matter than God striking me with lung cancer as a punishment. In the minds of Job's 3 friends, Job had done something terrible, and God had sent these calamities on him as retribution. But we have heaven's perspective on this story, so we know that this was not the case at all. But Job's friends were dead set certain that their theology was correct. And they launched into lecturing poor Job that he needed to confess whatever it was that he had done. No wonder he said to them at one point, "Miserable comforters you are." Job actually felt that his suffering was much greater than his complaints were. Job felt that he was doing well, considering. He repeatedly emphasized his faith in God, even saying, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust him." But even as Job begins to take courage in his suffering, his friends get all the more upset and emphatic with him for not accepting popular divine retribution or divine punishment theology. They seek to prove their case to him and even attempt to terrify Job into believing what he refuses to believe about God. Job insisted on seeing God as a loving redeemer rather than a harsh judge who punishes people directly for each and every sin. And in a note of determination in Job chapter 19, beginning in verse 25, Job said, I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand on the earth. And after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God. I myself will see him with my own eyes, I and not another. How my heart yearns within me. Oh, that we could all say such words in the midst of our suffering. I know that my Redeemer lives. I know he is in control. I know that he loves me and that he takes care of me. Beautiful words filled with faith. Job was confident that his Job was confident that his suffering was not meaningless. That God had a good reason for allowing it, even though he was blameless, despite the fact that his friends did not believe that. Take note. God never answered Job's questions as to why he was in the crucible. Job died having no idea what happened behind the curtain. What God gave Job was a tiny glimpse of himself. He gave Job a theophany, a personal experience with God. God showed Job who he was. One of my favorite quotes from Oswald Chambers goes something like this. I don't remember the exact quote, but it says, "It doesn't matter what God does. What matters is who God is." The point is that when we know who God is, that he is all-powerful, that he is all-knowing, that he is love, that he does care, that he does work all things together for good for those who are called according to his purposes, when we know God this way, what he does must be understood through that lens. No matter what he allows to happen, no matter what crucible, no matter how hard the Crisis Learning Center, we who know God do not despair when we suffer, because we know, along with Abraham and Paul and Job and countless others, we know that our suffering is not meaningless. We know that God will explain someday, and we know that we will be more than satisfied with the explanation, because who knows, maybe we too will be surrounded by people who are in heaven because of our story. Amen.